She arrived late, with her hands full and her patience at its limit. He was in the coffee line, or rather, cutting in line. What started as a heated argument in front of everyone became the spark for something much bigger. Hours later, in front of the entire team, she finds out the man she bumped into that morning is none other than the new owner of the company. And he remembers what happened perfectly. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with the modern bustle of Barcelona, creating that urban symphony that Julia Ramos had grown to love in her 30 years of life. The sun's rays filtered through the glass of the modern corporate building, illuminating the golden streaks of her brown hair as she ran through the lobby with a stack of reports that threatened to spill out of her arms. Late again, she thought, feeling the stress tighten her shoulders. Monday meetings always made her nervous, especially now that rumors of restructuring were circulating through the hallways like ghosts whispering doom. As an operations analyst for technology innovation in Catalonia, she knew her position wasn't exactly indispensable. The lobby coffee shop was her morning retreat, her only moment of peace before facing the day's corporate battles. But that morning, when she approached the counter, she was met with a scene that made her blood boil. A tall man, elegantly dressed in a suit that probably cost more than 2 months of his salary, had just brazenly cut his way to the front of the line. Not only that, but he was placing an endless order as if he owned the place. "I want 4 double espressos, 2 with oat milk, 1 tall Americano, 3 butter croutons, 2 almond. His voice was deep, with an accent that betrayed a privileged upbringing. Julia felt indignation rise in her throat. She had waited patiently for her turn, like any civilized person, and this stranger was acting as if the rules didn't apply to him. "Excuse me," she said, raising her voice just enough for them to hear. "I don't think you saw there was a line. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. It helps us keep bringing you incredible stories." The man turned slowly, and Julia found herself staring into gray eyes so intense that for a moment she lost her train of thought. He was handsome, incredibly handsome, with that kind of mature appeal that screamed power and experience. But there was something in his gaze that irritated her even more. A calculated coldness, as if he were sizing her up. "Excuse me," he asked, arching an eyebrow with a look of genuine curiosity. "A line," Julia repeated, indicating the 5 people waiting behind her. "Damn. You cut in line, and you're also placing an order for half the building while the rest of us wait." A murmur spread among those present. A few heads turned, and Julia felt her cheeks burning, but she had no intention of backing down. Injustice had always been her weak point. The stranger studied her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then a barely perceptible smile curved his lips. "You're right," he finally said. "How rude of me." But he didn't move. On the contrary, he turned to the barista and continued, "Add 2 chocolate muffins and a green tea as well." Julia's blood reached boiling point. "Seriously? You just agreed with me, and you continued to behave like an arrogant—" "Miss," he began, and his voice now had an amused tone that infuriated her even more. "Ramos. Julia Ramos." "Then I'm not a miss to you." "Miss Ramos," he continued to ignore her correction. "Perhaps you should consider that you don't know all the circumstances before making public accusations." "What circumstances justify rudeness?" she replied, crossing her arms. The reports slipped slightly, but she held them tight. More strength. "Are you some kind of VIP who deserves special treatment?" The man's expression changed subtly. The amusement faded, replaced by something darker. "Be careful what you wish for, Miss Ramos," he murmured. He murmured so quietly that only she could hear him. "Sometimes reality surpasses our expectations." He took the tray with their orders, left a €50 bill on the counter without expecting change, and walked away with measured steps. Before disappearing through the elevator doors, he turned one last time, his gray eyes fixed on hers, and Julia felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear exactly, but something more complex, as if she had just awakened something that had been dormant. Who does he think he is? She wondered as she ordered her usual black coffee and croissant, trying to ignore the curious stares of the other customers. But for the rest of the morning, she couldn't get those gray eyes out of her head, nor the feeling that she had just met someone who would change her life forever. Lower. Without knowing it, she had argued with a man who in a few hours would become her boss. The main conference room had never seemed so small. Julia settled back in her chair, usual, in the third row, while the nervous murmur of her colleagues filled the air. The general meeting had been called with barely 2 hours' notice, and everyone knew that important news rarely came looking good ahead. Do you think they're finally going to announce the layoffs? Carmen, her teammate, whispered as she twisted a pen between her fingers. I hope not, Julia replied, though her stomach clenched with anxiety, even with the rumors that had been circulating. The door opened, and Elena Vasquez, the director of human resources, entered with her perfectly practiced professional smile. Behind her walked a man Julia didn't recognize until he looked up. The world stopped. The gray eyes that had followed her all morning were now staring at her from the podium, framed by a face that radiated natural authority. The stranger from the coffee shop had transformed into something else entirely, imposing, elegant, and terrifyingly intimidating under the lights of the conference room. This can't be right, Julia thought, feeling her blood run cold. Good morning, everyone, Elena began in a clear voice. As you know, our company has been acquired by Del Valle Enterprises. It is my honor to introduce our new CEO, Martín Del Valle. The applause was polite but tense. Julia couldn't move, couldn't nachlep, couldn't even breathe properly. Her eyes were fixed on the man who was now approached the microphone, and for an infinitesimal instant, he searched for her in the crowd. When their eyes met, Julia saw something that disconcerted her. Amusement, as if it had all been a private joke of which she was the only one who did not understand the joke. Thank you for the welcome, Martin said, his voice filling the room without needing to be raised. I know that change can bring uncertainty, but I'm here to assure you that technological innovation Catalonia has a bright future ahead of it. Julia tried to focus on his words, but her mind was in a whirlwind. This relentless man she'd read about in business magazines, was the same person she'd argued with for cutting in line at the coffee shop. The same person she'd called arrogant, the same person she'd corrected as if he were a naughty child. Oh my God, I'm fired. It was her first coherent thought. We'll implement strategic changes to streamline our operation, Martin continued. Some positions will be restructured, others will be empowered. Wood. My team and I will evaluate each department individually. For the next 15 minutes, Julia listened with half an ear as Martín Del Valle laid out his vision for the company. His voice had that same deep cadence that had irritated her in the coffee shop, but now, amplified by the microphone and framed by his new position of power, she sounded completely different, authoritative, determined, dangerous. When the presentation ended and Elena opened the floor for questions, Julia kept her head down, praying she could turn invisible, but she felt his gaze on her, a tangible pressure that made her sweat break out under her black blazer. Any more questions? Elena asked, scanning the audience. The silence stretched for a few uncomfortable seconds. Then Martin spoke. Before we finish, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the team. Could someone from the operations department tell me what you see as our biggest current challenges? Julia felt the air thicken. Several of her colleagues looked in her direction. As a senior analyst, technically she should answer, but she couldn't. Not after what had happened that morning. Miss Martin. Polton paused deliberately, his eyes meeting hers directly. Ramos, right? Julia's heart raced so fast, she was afraid everyone could hear. She nodded slowly. We'd like to hear your perspective. All heads turned her way. Carmen nudged her encouragingly, but Julia felt paralyzed. This man had deliberately thrust her into the spotlight. It was revenge. He was toying with her. She stood up on shaky legs while feeling the full weight of all those gazes upon her. Well, she began, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. She took a deep breath and straightened up. I think our biggest challenge is the lack of communication between departments. We have excellent professionals, but we work in silos that limit our efficiency. Martin nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Interesting perspective. And what solution would you propose? The question took her by surprise, but it also sparked something in her. Despite the fear, despite the surreal situation, this was her turf. This was her job. She would implement cross-functional teams for key projects, with shared goals and clear metrics. She would also set up monthly interdepartmental meetings to align objectives. Have you ever worked in cross-functional teams, Miss Ramos? Yes. At my previous company, we implemented a similar system that increased productivity by 24%. For the first time since he had walked into the room, he smiled. It wasn't the smirk from the coffee shop, but something different, more genuine. Excellent. I'd like you to prepare a detailed report on that proposal. You can send it directly to my assistant. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, but Julia remained in her seat as the room emptied, trying to process what had just happened. Not only had he publicly fired her, he had given her a chance to shine. When she finally stood to leave, she found Martin del Valle still standing there talking to Elena. Seeing her pass, he politely waved goodbye to the HR director and intercepted her. Ms. Ramos. She stopped, turning slowly. Mr. Del Valle, I hope you understand that our morning meeting will not influence my professional decisions. Julia looked him straight in the eye, summoning all the courage she could muster. And I hope you understand that I treat everyone with the same respect regardless of their position. His smile widened. I'm glad to hear that. See you soon, Ms. Ramos. As he walked away, Julia couldn't help but avoid wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her career or if she had just started something completely unexpected. The email arrived at 7 a.m. the next day when Julia had barely finished making her coffee at home. The subject line was simple and direct. Strategic project. Meeting 9 a.m. Sender Martin del Valle. Julia read the message 3 times, feeling her stomach contract with each word. It was not a request. It was an elegantly disguised order. Report to my office with your proposal for cross-functional teams and be prepared to discuss its immediate implementation. Immediate implementation. As if reorganizing an entire company were as simple as rearranging the furniture in a room. 2 hours later, Julia found herself in front of the door of the main office, which until the previous week had belonged to the former CEO. Now a gold plaque announced, Martin del Valle, Co. She took a deep breath and knocked. Come in. The office had been completely transformed. The classic furniture had been replaced by sleek modern lines. Large windows offered panoramic views of Barcelona and the glass, and steel desk looked more like art than functional furniture. Martin stood in front of one of the windows, speaking on the phone in English. His voice was steady, almost cold, as he discussed figures and projections with someone on the other end of the line. Without turning, he held up a hand to signal she should wait. Julia took advantage of the moments to study him. He was wearing a dark gray suit that fit perfectly on his athletic frame, and the morning sun created a gold halo around his silhouette, and there was something hypnotic about his presence, a mix of power and control that was unsettling. Focus, she scolded herself. He's your boss, not a movie star. Excuse the delay, Martin said, finally hanging up and turning to her. New York investors don't understand Spanish time zones. He walked over to his desk, and Julia noticed how he moved. Every step calculated, every gesture deliberate. When he sat down, his gray eyes found hers immediately. Sit down, please. He brought the proposal. Julia nodded, placing a folder on the desk. Her hands were in hers. They trembled slightly, and she hoped he didn't notice. Here's the detailed analysis of the cross-functional team implementation, including timeline, estimated budget, and success metrics. Martin picked up the folder and began to leaf through it, his expression unreadable. Julia wrung her hands in her lap, feeling the seconds drag on like hours. Impressive, she finally murmured. Impressive, she finally murmured. You have considered every detail, from HR to operational, logistics. Thank you very much, sir. Something changed. I worked until 3 a.m., she admitted, then wondered why she had been so honest. Something shifted in Martin's expression. His eyes softened ever so slightly. He had not expected her to sacrifice her rest for this. My work is important to me, Julia replied, finding her voice. And if you are going to judge my performance, I would rather provide my best effort. Even after our initial meeting, the question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Julia felt heat rising up her neck. Especially after that, she said, holding his gaze. I don't like to come across as irresponsible. The smile that curved Martin's lips was unexpected and transformed his entire face. For a moment, he wasn't the intimidating yes, but simply a man who seemed genuinely pleased. Good, because I want you to lead this project. Julia blinked, certain she had misheard. Excuse me. The implementation of cross-functional teams will be your responsibility. You will report directly to me. You will have access to all departments, and a budget of euro 50,000 to start. But I am only an operations analyst. There are people with more experience, more seniority. Are you questioning my decision, Miss Ramos? The question had an edge that made her sit up straighter in her chair. No, sir. I just want to make sure you understand that. I understand perfectly, he interrupted her, standing up. You see problems where others see routines. You propose solutions where others look for excuses. And you are not afraid to confront authority when you think you are right. He walked around the desk until he was standing next to her chair. Julia had to tilt her head back to look at him, and the proximity made her aware of the scent of his cologne, something masculine and sophisticated that made her slightly dizzy. Those are exactly the qualities I need on this project, he continued, his voice lower. Now the question is, are you up for the challenge? Julia felt something ignite in her chest. Pride, determination, and something else she didn't want to identify. Yes, she answered without hesitation. I am ready. Excellent. Your first meeting with the department heads is tomorrow at 10. He returned to his side of the desk. One more thing, Miss Ramos. Yes. From now on, we will meet regularly to review progress. I expect punctuality, professionalism, and absolute honesty. Is that clear? Perfectly clear. When Julia left the office 20 minutes later, she had the feeling that she had just embarked on something much more complex than a simple work project. And from the way Martin del Valle had looked at her before dismissing her, she suspected that he felt exactly the same. What had I gotten myself into? She wondered as she waited for the elevator. But deep in her heart, a small voice whispered that whatever it was going to change her life forever. The first interdepartmental meeting was a disaster. Julia had arrived 15 minutes early. She had prepared the perfect presentation and had practiced every transition in her head. What she hadn't anticipated was being met with 5 department heads who were looking at her, as if she were a child playing at being an executive. With all due respect, Julia, Roberto Mendoza, head of finance, said with a condescending smile, "These changes sound very ambitious for someone who, well, until yesterday, was a junior analyst." "Senior analyst," she corrected, feeling her jaw clench. Of course, Roberto conceded, without changing his paternalistic tone. "But I think you need to understand the real complexities of managing multidisciplinary teams." "Take a breath," Julia told herself. "Don't let him throw you off balance." "I understand the complexities," she replied in a calm voice. "That's why I prepared a detailed risk-benefit analysis that includes, can I see those numbers? Sandra Lopez, the marketing manager, interrupted, holding out her hand for the report. For the next 40 minutes, Julia felt as if she were defending a doctoral thesis in front of a particularly hostile panel. Every proposal was questioned. Every figure was scrutinized under a microscope. Every idea dissected beyond recognition. When the meeting finally ended, she was left alone in the conference room, staring at the scattered pages of her presentation and feeling a lump in her throat. "How was your first meeting as a project leader?" The deep voice startled her. Martin was leaning against the door frame, watching her with that intensity that made her nervous. "It could have been better," she admitted, trying to gather her papers without sounding defeated. "Roberto can be defiant." "Defiant?" Julia let out a bitter laugh. "I think condescending would be a more accurate description." Martin stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The simple gesture completely changed the atmosphere of the room, making it more intimate, more charged. What exactly happened? Julia hesitated for a moment. Should she be professional and diplomatic, or should she be honest like he had asked her to be? They questioned every decision I proposed. Roberto practically told me I didn't have enough IGMUF experience. Sandra assumed my numbers were inflated, and Miguel from HR suggested that perhaps it would be better for someone more experienced to lead the project. Martin's expression hardened. Miguel didn't say it in those words, but the message was clear. Martin stepped forward until he was in front of her, separated only by the conference table. His gray eyes held an intensity that made her swallow. "And you told them, I will work twice as hard to show that they can trust my judgment." "Twice as hard, if necessary." "Yes." Something changed in Martin's expression. The hardness vanished, replaced by something that resembled admiration. "You shouldn't have to work twice as hard to earn the respect you already deserve, Miss Ramos Mess." The way he spoke her name in that deep and calm voice sent a sudden shiver running down her spine. "But that's the reality," she replied. "I'm the youngest on the management team. I have the least management experience, and I'm the only one who saw the real problems at this company before I got here." He cut her off. "The only one who proposed viable solutions instead of excuses. The only one who isn't afraid of me." The last comment floated between them like an electric charge. Julia felt her heart quicken. Should she be afraid of him? The question came out softer than she had intended, almost like a whisper. Martin studied her for a moment that felt like an eternity. "That depends," he murmured, coming around the table until he was beside her. "What are you afraid of, Julia?" The use of a first name caught her completely off guard. When he moved in close enough for her to perceive the warmth of his body, her entire mind suddenly went completely blank. "I don't know what he's talking about." "I think you do know." They were too close. Julia could see the small lines around his eyes, the stubble that had grown during the day, the way his lips curved up slightly when he looked at her like that. This is wrong, she thought. He's my boss. I just started this project. I can't. But she couldn't finish the thought because Martin raised a hand and with a delicacy that belied his imposing presence, brushed away a strand of hair that had fallen, crawling across her cheek. The contact was barely a brush, but Julia felt as if she had touched an electrical wire. "There's another interdepartmental meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice barely audible. "But this time I'll be there." "It's not necessary." "It is necessary." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world shrank to the space of a few inches between them. Julia felt that if he moved even a millimeter closer, if he lowered his head just a little, the sound of his phone would separate them like a bucket of cold water. Martin stepped away immediately, and Julia felt the cool air hit her skin like a reminder of where she was and who he was. "You should answer it," she murmured, gesturing toward her purse where the phone continued to ring. "Yes," he agreed, but his eyes never left her face. "And you should go home. It's been a long day." When Julia emerged from the conference room 5 minutes later, she could still feel the ghost of his touch on her cheek, and she knew, with a certainty that enthralled her in equal measure, that she had just an invisible line that would change everything between them, mujiscan them. The second interdepartmental meeting began exactly the same as the first, but with one crucial difference. Martin del Valle sat in the back of the room, watching in silence. Julia had spent a restless night, reliving over and over the moment he had touched her cheek. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the intensity of his gaze, the proximity of his body, the way his voice had softened as he spoke her name. "Focus," she instructed herself as she began her revised presentation. "This is work, just work." The first 15 minutes passed without incident. She had incorporated the valid suggestions from the previous meeting and had reinforced the weak points that had been pointed out. But when she got to the budget section, Roberto Mendoza attacked again. "These numbers are still unrealistic, Julia," he said, interrupting her mid-sentence. "You're 50,000 to reorganize teams that are already functioning. Frankly, it seems like a waste of resources to me." "The numbers are based on conservative projections," she replied, while maintaining her calm. "And the current teams are not performing optimally, as demonstrated by the productivity metrics for the last quarter." "Metrics that you interpreted?" Sandra Lopez joined the attack. "Excuse me, but I think we need the opinion of someone with more experience in financial analysis." Julia felt heat rising up her neck. It wasn't the first time her competence had been questioned, but doing so in front of Martin added an extra layer of humiliation. "I have an MBA and 5 years of experience in operations analysis," she replied, her voice sounding more strained than she intended. "I believe I am qualified to interpret productivity data." "No one doubts your education, my dear," Roberto said with that familiar condescending smile. "But theory and practice are very different things." "My dear," the word hit her like a slap in the face. He never called Miguel dear when he questioned her reports. He never used that same patronizing tone with Sandra when she presented marketing budgets that tripled his own. "If you'll allow me to continue," Julia said, taking a deep breath, "I believe the long-term benefits fully justify the initial investment." Julia. Roberto shook his head as if he were scolding a child. "This is exactly what I mean. Forget it." As Dangelu, palole dedia, pati, paetikem pati, padobete dishinstade, as dangere, dundengeta balo bete di, bat That's when Martin stood up. The movement was simple, almost casual. All conversation ceased. The air seemed to thicken. Excuse me for interrupting, but I'd like to clarify something. Mr. Mendoza, could you explain to me exactly what specific problem you are finding with the projections made by Ms. Ramos? Roberto blinked, clearly surprised by the CEO's direct intervention. Well, the numbers seem optimistic to me, Mr. Del Valle. In my experience? In your experience? Martin interrupted him gently. Have you ever led the implementation of cross-functional teams? Not exactly, but have you? Have you ever analyzed the impact of interdepartmental communication on overall productivity? Not directly, though. So let me share my experience, Martin said. And although his tone remained polite, there was a coldness in it that made Julia shiver. I have implemented similar systems in 4 different companies over the last 10 years. The average results were a 26% increase in productivity and an 18% reduction in operating costs. He turned to Sandra. Miss Lopez, do you consider a 300% return on investment in the first year to be, how did you put it, a waste of resources? Anta Soko. Sandra shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Of course not, Mr. Del Valle, I just thought that. And Mr. Martinez, he said no. I turned to Miguel from Resources. Humans. Do you think someone with more experience could have identified these systemic problems before Miss Ramos? Miguel shook his head quickly. No, of course not. Martin returned to his original position, but this time he remained standing, dominating the room with his presence. I'm glad we agree, he said. Because Ms. Ramos not only correctly identified the operational inefficiencies of this company, but she proposed the most viable solution I've seen in years of business consulting. His eyes met Julia's for a moment, and she saw something in them that both reassured her and unsettled her. Protectiveness, fierceness, and something deeper that she didn't dare name. From now on, he continued, any questioning of Ms. Ramos' decisions must be accompanied by specific data and viable alternatives. Viable alternatives. I will not tolerate any more interruptions based on prejudice. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Roberto turned red. Sandra lowered her gaze, and Miguel began frantically taking notes. Are there any questions about the projections presented? Martin asked. Silence reigned supreme. Excellent. Ms. Ramos, please continue. The rest of the meeting passed without incident. The departments unanimously approved the project. The budget was ratified, and the schedule was accepted without modification. As everyone filed out, Julia was left gathering her papers, trying to process what had just happened. Martin had left with the others, but returned a few minutes later. Are you okay? He asked, closing the door behind him. Julia looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. Thank you, she said simply. I didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he replied, stepping closer. I don't tolerate disrespect toward any member of my team, especially when that member is doing an exceptional job. Especially? She asked, immediately regretting the question. Martin stopped in front of her, and that familiar intensity returned to his eyes. Especially when it comes to you, Julia. This time when he reached out, she didn't pull away. And when he reached up to touch her cheek again, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel whatever was growing between them. But the moment was shattered when he abruptly withdrew his hand. This is complicated, he murmured. I know, she whispered. I shouldn't, I know. But neither of them moved, and Julia knew that, complicated or not, something had irrevocably changed between them. The next 2 weeks settled into an odd routine between Julia and Martin. Morning meetings to review project progress, working lunches that ran longer than necessary, and conversations that started about productivity metrics and ended in much more personal territory. That Friday morning, Julia arrived at the office early, determined to finish the implementation report before the weekend. What she didn't expect was to find Martin in the lobby coffee shop, doing exactly what he had done the first time they met, an enormously complicated request. 2 double espressos, 1 with oat milk, 1 Americano, 3 croissants, she recited to the barista with the same precision as ever. Julia couldn't help but smile. He sidled up and got in line, behind him. "Really? Are you still cutting in line?" "Nada," she asked with mock indignation. Martin turned, his serious expression instantly transforming into something much softer. "Good morning, Miss Ramos," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Here. And for your information, I was here first." I'm not so sure. I think I had historical priority in this coffee shop." "Historical priority?" She arched an eyebrow. "That's a legal term." "It's a Julio Ramos term, far more binding than any law." To her surprise, Martin laughed. It wasn't the controlled smile she'd seen in meetings, but a genuine warm laugh that completely transformed his face. "In that case," he said, stepping aside with an exaggerated bow, "I yield my place to the highest authority in coffee matters." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Del Valle," she replied, trying to maintain a straight face but failing miserably. "Martin," he corrected her. "After hours, I'm Martin. Dayton." The casual comment created an intimate bubble around them, as if the rest of the world had momentarily disappeared. "And what will the coffee expert order?" he asked. "A black coffee and a butter croissant. Nothing too complicated." "Boring," Martin declared. "Allow me to suggest something else." Before Julia could even protest, he turned to the barista. "Cancel my previous order. We'll have lattes, one with vanilla, 2 chocolate croissants, silla, sacchio." He gave Julia a mischievous look. 2 blueberry muffins." "That's way too much food," she protested. "It's Friday morning and you've been here since 7. When was the last time you had a proper breakfast?" The question caught her off guard, not just because of its content, but because of the tone of genuine concern in his voice. "Yesterday morning, I think." "Yesterday morning?" Her expression turned serious. "What did you eat last night?" "A sandwich while I was working on the report." Martin looked at her as if she had confessed to a crime. "That ends today. Let's go." "Let's where?" "To my office. Let's have breakfast like civilized people." "But the report." "The report can wait 20 minutes. 10 minutes later, Julia found herself sitting on the couch in Martin's office with a cup of vanilla-scented coffee in her hands and feeling strangely at home. "Oh, better," he asked, sitting in the armchair across from her with his own coffee. "Much better," she admitted. "Although I must say that this is very strange. To be here having breakfast with you, with my boss, on a couch that probably costs more than my monthly salary." Martin laughed again, and Julia realized that she loved the sound of it. "Just so you know, this couch didn't cost that much. Only 3 times your monthly salary." "Martin, what?" "I think I was kidding." Julia threw a napkin at him, which he expertly dodged. "Did you just throw something at me?" she asked with mock indignation. "At yours truly. Technically, my boss is the one forcing me to eat too much sugar during working hours. This could be considered harassment." "Harassment via baked goods?" "That's new." They were laughing when Martin's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "Sorry I have to answer. He's from London." "Of course." Julia started to get up. "I'm leaving, so you can't," he said quickly, covering the microphone. "Stay, please." There was something in his voice, a subtle plea that made her sit back down. Martin answered in English, and as he spoke, Julia watched him transform. His posture straightened. His voice became colder, more authoritative. It was like watching 2 different people occupying the same body. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, during which Martin paced the office, gesturing with one hand as he discussed figures and projections. When he finally hung up, he ran a hand through his hair and sank back into the armchair with an exhausted sigh. "Is everything okay?" Julia asked softly. "Problems with an acquisition in the UK. Nothing that can't be resolved, but it's stressful," she finished. "Yes." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Martin's eyes were closed, his head tilted back, and Julia could see the lines of tension around his mouth. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said impulsively. "Shoot. Do you like what you do?" Martin opened his eyes and looked at her with a surprised expression. "I do," he repeated. "That's an interesting question. I saw you completely change during that call, like you were someone else." "Maybe I am," he murmured. "Maybe we all have different versions of ourselves for different situations. And which version is the real one?" The question hung between them, charged with intimacy. Martin studied her for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "It's been a long time since I asked myself that question." "Okay," Julia said, standing up. "For what it's worth, I like the version shared by chocolate croissants better." The smile that lit up Martin's face was so radiant that Julia felt her heart skip a beat. "Julia," called out to her as she was at the door. "Yeah, thanks for breakfast. For the question. For this." She nodded, not trusting her voice to respond coherently. "I." As she walked back to her office, Julia couldn't ignore the realization settling in her chest. She was falling in love with her boss, and from the way he had looked at her, she suspected the feeling might be mutual, which only complicated things in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. Monday morning brought a surprise that Julia didn't see coming. As she was checking emails in her office, Carmen burst in with a smile that didn't bode well. "Have you seen the new outside consultant she hired from the Valley?" she asked, practically vibrating with excitement at the gossip. "What outside consultant?" Julia looked up from her computer, feeling an inexplicable pang of anxiety. "Isabella Martinez, a corporate restructuring specialist, has just arrived from Madrid and, from what I've heard, worked directly with Martin at his previous company, Humilló." Julia's stomach clenched in a way she didn't like at all. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Well, she's stunning, tall, elegant, speaks 4 languages, and according to Roberto in finance, has a stellar track record in international consulting. Oh, and she's also absolutely beautiful." Julia tried to focus on her screen, but the words were becoming blurred. "Don't be ridiculous," she chided herself. "Martin can hire whoever he wants. His professional life is none of your business." But when she saw Isabella Martinez walking into Martin's office at 10 o'clock sharp, all her rational defenses collapsed. The woman was exactly as Carmen had described her, tall, sophisticated, in a designer suit that fit her as if it had been made specifically for her. Her black hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and when she smiled as she greeted Martin's assistant, Julia could see why everyone in the office was talking about her. She was the kind of woman who belonged in Martin's world. Successful, stylish, probably with connections in the highest echelons of the business world, the kind of woman a billionaire CEO should be around, not some operations analyst who argued with strangers in coffee shops. For the next 2 hours, Julia tried to focus on her work, but every time she saw Martin's closed office door, she felt a twinge of something she refused to identify as jealousy. When Isabella finally walked out with that effortless grace that only a few women seem to possess, Julia couldn't help but study her. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something else, an innate confidence, a way of moving through the world as if it belonged to her. "Julia!" Martin's voice startled her. He was standing in the doorway of his office watching her with an unreadable expression. "Can you come in for a moment?" She nodded, trying to ignore the curious look Isabella gave her as she passed. "Close the door, please," Martin said as she entered. Julia complied, turning to face him as he sat on the edge of his desk with his arms firmly folded across his chest. There was something different about his posture, a tension that hadn't been there during their Friday breakfast. "Is everything okay with the project?" she asked, keeping her tone professional. "The project is going great. I wanted to talk to you about Isabella." The name dropped between them like a pebble in still water. Julia felt her stomach clench again. "No need. Hiring is your call, Julia. Oh, yeah." The way he said her name, laced with a patience that bordered on exasperation, made her look directly at him. "Isabella is an outside consultant. I hired to help transition 13 apartments unrelated to your project, Sue. We worked together 2 years ago on an acquisition in Valencia. She's competent professional, and she'll be here exactly 6 weeks." "Like I said, it's none of my business," Julia replied, but her voice sounded more strained than she intended. Martin stood up and walked over to her with that way of moving that always made her nervous. "Are you upset?" "Of course not. Why would I be?" "I don't know. You tell me." They stopped less than a meter apart, and Julia could see the familiar intensity in his gray eyes. But this time there was something else. Amusement, as if he found her reaction amusing. "I'm not upset," he insisted. "I just thought maybe you should have informed me sooner, considering some of those departments work directly on my project." "Is that what's bothering you? The lack of professional communication?" There was an edge to the question that made her sit up straight. "Yes, that's exactly it." Liar. The word came out so softly that Julia almost didn't hear it, but she did hear it and felt her cheeks heat. "Excuse me. You're jealous," Martin said, and while there was amusement in his voice, his eyes had turned intense. "And you have no reason to be. I'm not, Julia." "Okay," he snapped. "Maybe it did bother me a little, but not for the reasons you think." "So why?" She pulled away, needing some space to think, to breathe, and to find the right words to say. "Because she's perfect," she finally admitted. "The kind of woman who belongs in your world. Sophisticated, successful, elegant. Someone who understands your life, who can move in your social circle without feeling like a fish out of water." The silence that followed was so absolute that Julia could hear her own heart beating. She turned slowly, expecting to find Martin amused or perhaps uncomfortable by her confession. Instead, she found him staring at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Do you think that's what I want?" his voice asked, barely audible. "It's not." Martin moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps until he was close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "Julia," he murmured, raising a hand to touch her cheek. "For the past few years I've been surrounded by women exactly as you described them, elegant, sophisticated, perfect. On paper, why not?" His thumb traced a soft line along her cheekbone, and Julia felt her knees go weak. "And you know what they all have in common," she continued. "That none of them have ever made me feel even a fraction of what you make me feel when you argue with me over coffee." Julia's heart stopped completely. "Martin, I don't want perfect, Julia. I want real. I want someone who will challenge me, who will make me laugh, who will worry if I've had a proper breakfast. I want someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being arrogant, even if I'm her boss." Their faces were inches apart now. Julia could feel his breathing, could see the tiny flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could smell the scent of his cologne mingling with something purely masculine. "I want someone like you," he whispered, and then slowly, as if giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he began to tilt his head toward hers. Julia closed her eyes, her heart beating so loudly She was sure he could hear it. She felt the heat of his lips coming closer, the world narrowing to that moment, to that sense of inevitability. The shrill ringing of his phone tore them apart like a bolt of lightning. They both froze for a second, breathing heavily, staring at each other with a mixture of desire and frustration. "You should," Martin began. "Yes," Julia murmured, pulling away shakily. She should answer, but neither of them moved immediately. They stood there staring at each other, aware that something fundamental had changed between them. When he finally emerged from the office 50 minutes later, his lips still tingled with the promise of a kiss that had almost happened. And she knew, with a certainty that both terrified and thrilled her, that the next time they were alone like this, nothing would stop them, not even common sense. The storm arrived in Barcelona on a Wednesday night, as if the sky had decided to reflect the emotional turbulence Julia had been feeling all week. Ever since the near kiss in Martin's office, they had maintained a careful professional distance, but each encounter was charged with an electric tension that threatened to consume them both. It was almost 9 p.m. when Julia finally finished reviewing the latest implementation reports. The office was mostly empty. Only the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady patter of rain against the windows broke the silence. She packed her things slowly, putting off heading out into the deluge that had broken out over the city. She hadn't brought an umbrella, and her light coat wouldn't be enough protection from the storm raging outside. When she stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, she found that the lobby lights had been dimmed and the night security guard was making his rounds. She walked up to the glass doors and sighed as she watched the sheets of water pouring down from the black sky. She didn't think to bring an umbrella, did she? The deep voice startled her. She turned to find Martin emerging from the shadows of the lobby, his suit crisp and slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked tired, with lines of tension around his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. "What are you doing here so late?" she asked, her heart racing as it always did when he showed up unexpectedly. "Could I ask you the same thing?" he replied, coming over to stand beside her in front of the doors. "But I guess he was finishing reviewing the cross-team reports, like, because I know you. Julia. Picoru, Julia. You work late when something's bothering you. And there were some implementation issues in the marketing department today." Such a precise and personal observation made her turn to face him fully. "I didn't know you paid so much attention to my work schedule." "I pay attention to a lot of things about you," he murmured, his gray eyes reflecting the dimmed lights of the lobby. Maybe a little too much attention. There between them thickened with that familiar tension. Julia could feel the heat from his body, despite the distance between them. She could smell his cologne mixed with something purely masculine that drove her wild. An angel. "Marketing issues solved," she said, trying to keep the conversation on safe ground. And Sandra finally understood the importance of sharing information between teams. "I wasn't just talking about marketing issues," Martin replied, turning fully toward her. He was talking about what has her working until 9 at night, in an empty office. Julia felt her defenses crumbling under the intensity of his gaze. "I don't know what he's talking about." "No." He took a step closer. "That has nothing to do with the fact that we've been avoiding each other since Monday. We haven't been avoiding each other. We've been professional." Julia, the way he said her name, loaded with frustration, and something deeper made her shiver. "Okay," she admitted. "Maybe I have been confused." "Confused about what?" "About this," she gestured between them. "About what's going on between us, about what almost happened in her office." Lightning lit up the sky at that moment, followed immediately by a clap of thunder that rattled the windows. Julia flinched involuntarily, and Martin instinctively moved closer, as if to shield her from the storm. "I don't like storms," she murmured, feeling ridiculous for the confession. "Since when?" "Since I was a little girl. My father used to travel out for work, and my mother and I would be left alone. During storms, she would lock herself in her room, and I would stay up all night waiting for it to pass." I didn't know why I was telling her this. It was something she rarely shared with anyone, but there was something about Martin's presence that made her feel safe, protected. How old was he? 7, 8. Dumb, right? "He's not dumb," he said softly. And when another clap of thunder echoed, he leaned in until he was close enough to touch her. Childhood fears can be the most persistent. His hands found her arms, a gentle but firm touch that sent waves of heat through her body. "Julia," he murmured, "I need you to know something." "What?" "What almost happened on Monday wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness or an impulsive decision." Her heart raced. "Martin, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about your smile when you threw me that napkin, about the way you get nervous when I'm too close, about the way you look when you are focused on your work, biting your lower lip without realizing it. Every word was like a caress, and Julia felt her knees go weak. "You shouldn't tell me that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I'm your employee. Because this is complicated. Because you're scared." He broke up for her. "You're not." Martin studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes intense in the dim light of the lobby. "I'm terrified," he finally admitted. "I haven't felt this way about anyone in years." "No," since he stopped abruptly, as if he had been about to reveal something he'd rather keep hidden. "Not since what?" Julia asked softly. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Not since someone betrayed me in the worst possible way. Someone I trusted completely, who knew my weaknesses, my plans, my dreams. Someone who used all that information to nearly destroy my career." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. "What happened?" "He was my business partner, and more. When I decided to expand my company internationally, she sold all my contacts and strategies to a competitor. I lost 3 major contracts and nearly went bankrupt." "Martin, I'm so sorry." "Ever since then, I've been very careful about who I trust. I've kept my personal and professional relationships completely separate." Another bolt of lightning lit up the sky, and this time Julia didn't flinch. He was too focused on the man in front of her, on the way his voice had turned hoarse with emotion. "What now?" she asked. "Now you come," he murmured, his hands moving from her arms to her face, framing her features with a delicacy that belied their strength. "A motive, beautiful, someone who isn't afraid to challenge me, who makes me want to be better than I am." His thumbs traced soft lines along her cheeks. "Someone who makes me want to risk everything again. What if I hurt him? What if this doesn't work? What if it does?" The question hung between them like a promise. Julia could feel the warmth of his hands on her face. She could see the intensity of his emotions reflected in his gray eyes. "Now," he whispered, leaning closer. "Tell me to move away. Tell me this is a bad idea, and I'll stop right now." But she couldn't. Not when he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Not when she finally understood that what she felt for him was reciprocated. Instead of pulling away, he moved closer. "I can't," he murmured against her lips. "I can't walk away from you." This time, when he tilted his head toward hers, nothing interrupted them. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both memorizing the feeling. But when Julia sighed against his mouth, something snapped in Martin. His arms went around her, pulling her against his body, and the kiss deepened into something desperate hungry, filled with weeks of pent-up tension. Julia clutched at his suit, feeling as if she were falling and flying at the same time. She could feel the solidity of his body against hers, the heat radiating from him, the way he trembled slightly as he kissed her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. When they finally broke apart to breathe, he rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. "There's no going back after this. I don't want there to be." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, in the silent lobby of an office building, two had just found something worth risking everything for. The next 2 weeks were the most confusing and exciting of Julia's life. Nothing had officially changed. She was still the cross-team project leader. She still reported to Martin, still attended the same meetings. But everything was different. Business encounters had become a careful dance of stolen glances and accidental brushes. Martin had started staying later at the office, magically coinciding with his own extended hours. Working lunches ran longer than necessary. Conversations about productivity metrics drifted to more personal topics, and there was always this electric tension between them that threatened to consume them. They had managed to keep their relationship a secret, but Julia knew they couldn't do it indefinitely. She had already noticed a few curious glances from Carmen, and Roberto from finance had made a sarcastic comment about her meteoric rise, which had put her on alert. That Thursday morning, as she reviewed weekly reports in her office, she heard raised voices in the hallway. She peeked in discreetly and saw Isabella Martinez talking to Miguel from HR near the coffee machine. "I'm just saying it's interesting how certain people can gain influence so quickly," Isabella was saying, her voice loud in others and odd to others to hear. "In my experience, when a young SEO shows such obvious favorability, Isabella." "Please," Miguel interrupted, visibly uncomfortable. "I don't think it's appropriate to speculate about speculating." Isabella laughed, but there was nothing funny about the sound. "Miguel, I've worked with Martin for years. I know his patterns." Julia felt her stomach clench. Patterns. What exactly did that mean? "Also," Isabella continued, "I've reviewed the numbers from the cross-team project act. The results are impressive, yes, but the metrics are optimized in a very convenient way." "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone very clever has manipulated the data to show exactly what it says is what Martin wanted to see. The question is, did he do it out of incompetence or for more personal reasons?" Julia stepped away from the door, feeling as if she had received a physical blow. Isabella was implying that she had manipulated the data, that her relationship with Martin had influenced the results of the project. She returned to her desk with shaking hands, but she could not concentrate on her work. Isabella's words repeated themselves in her mind like a broken record. Patterns, favoritism, manipulation. At 2 p.m., she received a message from Martin asking her to come to his office. When she arrived, she found him in front of the window, his posture tense. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Julia obeyed, noticing the coldness in his voice. Something was wrong. "Has something happened?" Martin asked. He turned slowly, and she saw something in his eyes that alarmed her. It was not the warmth of the last few weeks, but the professional coldness he had displayed during their first meetings. "We have received a formal complaint about your project," he said without preamble. "A complaint of what kind?" "Data manipulation, favoritism." And she paused, as if the next words were hard to come by. "Use of personal influence for professional gain." The world wobbled around Julia. She gripped the back of the chair across from Martin's desk to stay upright. Who made that complaint? That's confidential. Martin, you know I'll never know. His sharp voice interrupted her. I really do, Julia. The question hit her like a slap in the face. She straightened, finding strength in her indignation. You're asking me if I manipulated the data for my own project. I'm asking if our personal involvement has affected your professional judgment. Of course not. Her voice came out louder than she intended. Every number, every metric, every analysis is supported by complete documentation. You can review it yourself. I already did. The words fell between them like a guillotine. Julia looked at him, feeling betrayed. Have you done it already? When? Last night, after you received the complaint. And Martin was silent for a moment that felt like eternal. The facts are correct, he finally admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that our relationship has created a compromising situation. A compromising situation? Julia felt the tears threatening to spill over, but she bit them back. That's how you see what's between us. I don't know how to look at it, Julia. This is all a mistake. She broke up for him. That's what you were going to say. Martin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign of his frustration. I don't know. Maybe. The words cut through her like daggers. She straightened up completely, finding a dignity she didn't know she possessed. Ooh. Okay, he said in a calm voice. If you think this was a mistake, if you think I'm capable of compromising my professional integrity for personal gain, then perhaps we should end this now. Julia didn't interrupt him. Let me finish. I have worked harder in the last 2 weeks than at any time in my career. Every result, every improvement in productivity, every success on this project has been honestly earned. If you can see that, if your trust in me is so fragile that an anonymous tip could destroy it. She paused, taking a deep breath. Then maybe you don't know me as well as I thought. The silence that followed was so thick it was almost palpable. Martin was looking at her, his expression unreadable. And for a moment, Julia thought she saw pain in his gray eyes. What do you propose? He asked finally. That you do whatever you have to do professionally. Investigate the tip, review all my work, bring in outside auditors if necessary, but don't ask me to apologize for doing my job well, and don't ask me to pretend that what happened between us meant nothing. What about us? The question hung in the air between them. Julia felt her heart break a little more. I don't know, Martin. You're the one who seems to have doubts about my motivations. Maybe you should figure out what you truly believe before asking me that question. Without waiting for an answer, she headed for the door. Julia, wait. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't turn around. Send me the official report on the investigation when it's ready. I'll be in my office working on the project I built with my own competence and integrity. As she left Martin's office, Julia held her head high until she reached her own desk. Only then did she allow herself to tremble. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Someone was trying to sabotage her career, and the person she trusted the most had just doubted her. But she wouldn't give up. Not without a fight. 3 days after the confrontation in Martin's office, Julia had turned her job into a fortress. She arrived before anyone else, stayed after everyone else, and documented every last detail, every decision, every analysis, every conversation related to her project. If anyone wanted to question her integrity, they would have to face a mountain of evidence to the contrary. But the tension was taking its toll. She had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes had formed, and Carmen had begun asking concerned questions that Julia deflected with excuses about her workload. That Monday morning, as she reviewed the quarterly productivity reports for the 3rd time, her internal phone rang. Ms. Ramos, Mr. Del Valle needs to see you in the main boardroom immediately. Elena from HR announced. Julia's stomach dropped. The main boardroom, not Martin's office, but the formal space where the company's important decisions were made, was in the office. When she arrived, she found Martin sitting at the end of the table, with Elena to his left, and to her surprise, Isabella Martinez to his right. The setup screamed courtroom, and Julia knew immediately that this would be the moment of truth. "Sit down, please," Martin said, without looking her in the eye. Julia took a seat across from them, her spine straight and her hands clasped firmly on the table. "We have completed our investigation into the allegations made against your project," Elena began in a formal voice. "We have reviewed all the data, consulted with external auditors, and interviewed several team members." "So?" asked Julia, her voice sounding firmer than she felt. "The data is correct," Elena admitted. "All numbers, projections, and analyses have been thoroughly verified and are accurate." Julia felt a moment of relief, but something in the air told her that the conversation was not over. "However," Elena continued, "other topics have come up during the investigation." "What kind of topics?" It was Isabella who answered, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Topics related to the nature of your relationship with the Lord of the Valley." Julia's blood ran cold. "Excuse me. Several employees have reported intimate behavior between the two of you. Long lunches, frequent private meetings, changes in professional dynamics after hours." Julia looked at Martin for the first time since he had entered the room. He stared at the documents in front of him, his jaw set. "I don't see how my personal life is relevant to my professional performance," Julia said carefully. "It becomes relevant when it creates perceptions of favoritism," Isabella replied. "As an external consultant, I must recommend that measures be taken to preserve the integrity of the company." "What kind of measures?" "Transfer to another department or—" Isabella paused carefully. "Termination of contract." The air thickened in the room. Julia felt as if the oxygen had been sucked out of her lungs. "Wait a moment," she said, finding her voice. "You're telling me that after confirming that my work is impeccable, that my results are legitimate, that I have done nothing ethically questionable, you're going to punish me for my personal life?" "It's not a punishment," Elena said quickly. "It's a preventative measure for—" "A ridiculous preventative measure," a voice from the doorway interrupted her. Everyone turned to see Carmen entering the room with a determined expression and a folder in her hands. "Carmen, this is a private meeting," Elena began. "Not as private as they thought," Carmen replied, closing the door behind her, "especially considering that someone in this room has been distributing false information about Julia." She walked over to the table and dropped the folder in front of Isabella. Asked Martin for the first time. "I am talking about emails," Carmen said. "I'm talking about emails," Carmen said. Emails that Isabella had been sending to various department heads, suggesting that Julia's project results were suspect, that she was using unorthodox methods to gain support, and that there was an inappropriate relationship between Julia and the CEO. Isabella's face went pale. "That's completely false." "Look," Carmen opened the folder and pulled out several printed sheets, "because I have copies of all of them. Courtesy of Roberto from Finance, who apparently felt uncomfortable with her smear campaign and decided to document everything." Martin took the papers Carmen handed him, and Julia could see his expression darken as he read ahead. Isabella said in a dangerously calm voice, "I was acting in the best interest of the company," Isabella stammered. "As an external consultant, it's my responsibility to identify potential risks. It's like an exceptional employee who's getting extraordinary results." Martin interrupted her, standing up. "Or risks like not getting the permanent position I was hoping to get here." The silence that followed was deafening. "Carmen," Martin continued, Is there anything else? Yes, Carmen replied, pulling out more papers. I also have testimony from 3 department heads confirming that Isabella tried to convince them that Julia was incompetent and that they should resist changes to the project. Miguel from HR can confirm that. All eyes turned to look at Miguel, who nodded reluctantly. He said, that is certainly true. Isabella contacted me several times, suggesting that perhaps we should reconsider the project leadership. Martin turned to Isabella, his expression icy. Pick up your things. Your contract is terminated immediately. Martin, please, Isabella began. We have a history. We work well together. Exactly, he interrupted her. We have a history, and you should have known better than to betray my trust again. Isabella looked at him with shock, then with understanding, and finally with bitterness. This is because of her, isn't it? She asked, pointing at Julia. Are you going to ruin our professional partnership on a whim? This isn't because of anyone but you, Martin replied coldly. Elena, please accompany Miss Martinez to collect her belongings. When Isabella and Elena left, the room fell silent. Carmen looked between Julia and Martin, clearly sensing the tension. I think I should go too, Julia murmured. I'll see you later. When they were alone, Martin slowly approached where Julia was sitting. Julia, she interrupted. Did you know that Isabella was the one behind all this? No, she admitted, but I should have suspected. She and I had a complicated relationship years ago. When I hired her, I thought we could keep everything professional. A complicated relationship, Julia repeated. Martin sighed, sitting in the chair next to her. Isabella was the partner I mentioned, the one who betrayed me and almost ruined my company. When she applied to work here, I thought she had changed, that we could separate the past from the present, and when she filed a complaint against me, all my paranoia returned, and it ended with him. All my fears about trusting someone, about mixing the personal with the professional. I reacted from fear instead of logic. Julia looked at him, seeing the vulnerability in his gray eyes. You hurt me, Martin, when you doubted me, when you questioned my motivations. I know it, and I have no excuse for it. He turned to her completely. Julia, for 3 days I haven't been able to sleep. I haven't been able to concentrate. I haven't been able to think about anything. But what I said, the way I looked at you, the fact that I allowed my past to poison my present. He leaned closer, and Julia could see the desperate sincerity in his expression. You are not Isabella. You are honest. You are whole. You are brilliant. You are everything she never was. And I was an idiot for letting the ghosts of the past make me doubt you. What now? Julia asked softly. Now I ask for your forgiveness. I ask for a second chance. I ask that you allow me to prove that I can trust you, us, in the way that you deserve. Julia studied his face for a long moment. She could see the genuine regret, but she could also feel the echo of the pain she had experienced over the past few days. It's going to take time, he said finally. You can't expect me to forget how you made me feel with a simple apology. I know, he replied, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I'm asking for why. Martin stood up and walked to the door of the boardroom. To Julia's surprise, he opened it wide and walked back to where she was standing. Starting with this, he said, taking her hands in his, Julia Ramos. I am completely, irrevocably in love with you, and I don't care who knows it. And I don't care who knows it. Julia's heart skipped a beat. Martin, I've been living in fear for years, keeping everyone at a distance, protecting my heart behind professional walls. But you broke those walls down without even trying. Though it terrifies me, I don't want to live without you. Julia felt the tears threatening to spill over, but this time they were tears of relief, of hope. I'm in love with you too, he whispered. That's why it hurt so much that you doubted me. Never again, he promised, raising a hand to touch her cheek. "I will never doubt you, us, what we have. Again." And this time, when he leaned in to kiss her, Julia didn't pull away. She gave herself over to the kiss, completely feeling all the wounds of the past few days begin to heal. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Do you think we can make this work, Vida?" he murmured. "I think it's worth a try," she replied, "but on one condition." "Any condition? No more secrets?" "If we're going to do this, we do it completely, openly, and honestly." Martin smiled, and it was that genuine smile that had made her fall in love with him since day one. Deal. 2 weeks after the revelation about Isabella, life at the office had taken on a new normal. Martin had been true to his word about transparency. While they maintained an appropriate level of professionalism during work hours, they no longer hid their relationship. Lunches together were more frequent. Their gazes held each other for longer, and occasionally, Martin would show up at her office with coffee and a smile that made Julia's heart race. But that Friday morning, when Julia arrived at the office, found something he didn't expect. A huge bouquet of red roses on his desk. "Martin, did he send you flowers?" Carmen asked, appearing at her shoulder with a curious expression. "Sarcasm." Julia frowned, taking the small white card that accompanied the flowers. "To the most intelligent and beautiful woman in Barcelona. I look forward to getting to know you better." "Alejandro, they're not Martin's," she murmured, feeling an odd mix of confusion and alarm. "Alejandro," Carmen read over her shoulder. "Who's Alejandro?" Before Julia could respond, the familiar voice of her college friend echoed from the doorway of her office. "Julia, what a surprise to see you here." She turned to find Sofia Herrera, her classmate from her master's degree, accompanied by a tall, dark, and undeniably handsome man. He wore an impeccable suit and a confident smile that immediately put her on alert. "Sophia," Julia said, standing up to hug her friend. "What are you doing here?" "I work here now." "Well, technically I work for the consulting firm that just signed a contract with you guys, and I wanted to introduce you to my boss." She smiled, indicating the man next to her. "Julia, this is Alejandro Ruiz." "Alejandro, this is Julia Ramos, the brilliant friend I've told you so much about." Alejandro approached with that natural confidence that some successful men had, extending his hand towards Julia. "The pleasure is mine," he said, holding her hand out for a little longer than necessary. "Sophia wasn't exaggerating when she said you were beautiful, as well as intelligent." Julia withdrew her hand, feeling uncomfortable with the direct compliment. "Are you the new consultants for the expansion project?" "What?" "Exactly," Alejandro replied. "And I hope we can work together very closely. I've reviewed your work in cross-functional teams, and I must say I'm impressed." "Flowers were your idea, I suppose," Julia said, pointing towards her desk. "Guilty," he smiled. "He wanted to make a good first impression." Wrong first impression, Julia thought, but kept a polite smile. "Oh, they're very beautiful, thank you. But in the future, a simple email would have been enough to start a professional collaboration." If Alejandro got the hint, he didn't show it. His smile widened. "Noted, although I hope we can get to know each other outside of the professional sphere as well. Sofia told me, you know, the best restaurants in Barcelona." Before Julia could respond, a familiar and dangerously controlled voice sounded from the doorway. "Am I interrupting something?" Martin stood in the doorway, his expression calm but his gray eyes shining with an intensity that Julia recognized immediately. He was using his SEO voice, the one he used when he wanted to intimidate without being obviously hostile. "Not at all," Julia replied quickly. "Martin, this is Sofia Herrera and Alejandro Ruiz from the consulting firm Estrategias Aéreas." Martin entered the office, and Julia could see how his presence immediately changed the dynamic of the space. He moved with that natural authority that characterized him, but there was something more territorial in his stance than usual. "Mr. Del Valle, Alejandro said, extending his hand. I have heard much about you. Your reputation in the business world is impressive. Martin shook his hand, but Julia noticed how his eyes fixed on the flowers on his desk before returning to Alejandro. And you are the leader of the consulting team? He asked with apparent politeness. That's right. We look forward to contributing meaningfully to your expansion project. In fact, I was hoping to discuss some ideas with Ms. Ramos, as her focus on cross-functional teams could be highly relevant to our recommendations. I'm sure Ms. Ramos will be very professional to work with, Martin said. And although his tone was neutral, Julia could hear the edge beneath his words. She is an exceptional professional, without a doubt. Alejandro agreed. Although I look forward to getting to know her more personal side as well. The best professional collaborations always include a human element, don't you think? The air in the office thickened. Julia saw Martin's jaw tense almost imperceptibly. I think Ms. Ramos is quite selective about who she spends her personal time with, Martin replied, his eyes never leaving Alejandro Limosatro. She's a very busy woman. In fact, I was wondering if you would like to have dinner with me tonight. I know of an excellent restaurant in the Gothic Quarter. Julia felt the tension radiating off Martin like waves of heat. I knew I had to handle this situation carefully. It's very kind of you, Alejandro, but I already have plans for tonight. Tomorrow, then, Alejandro. Sophia intervened, clearly sensing the discomfort. Maybe we should let Julia get used to the idea of working with us before nonsense. Alejandro interrupted. Life is too short not to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. That's when Martin stepped closer, positioning himself slightly between Alejandro and Julia. Auna. Mr. Ruisi said in that dangerously soft voice that Julia had learned to fear in others. I think you should know that Miss Ramos and I have a relationship that goes beyond the professional. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia blinked in surprise. Alejandro lost his confident smile, and Julia felt a mix of surprise and gratitude at Martin's forthright statement. Oh, Alejandro said finally. I didn't know you and Miss Ramos were involved. I'm served. Now you know, Martin replied simply. Alejandro recovered quickly, though his smile now seemed forced. Of course. My apologies for the mix-up. We'll keep everything strictly professional. Excellent, Martin said. Elena from HR can coordinate the necessary meetings between your team and ours. I'm sure it will be a very professional collaboration. After Sophia and Alejandro left, Julia turned to Martin with a mix of amusement and exasperation. Seriously? You marked your territory in front of the external consultants? Martin approached her, taking one of the roses from the bouquet and examining it with a disapproving expression. That man was shamelessly flirting with you in your office, in my company, and you were jealous, extremely jealous, he admitted without an ounce of shame. Do you have any idea how I felt when I saw these flowers on your desk? When I heard him invite you to dinner as if I didn't exist? Julia approached him, putting her hands on his chest. Martin, I declined his invitation. I have no interest in Alejandro Ruiz. I know, he murmured, wrapping his arms around her. But that didn't make it any less difficult to hear him talk about getting to know your personal side. You know what I like about you when you're jealous? She asked, smiling. You don't pretend not to care, you don't play at being indifferent. Martin kissed her softly. I could never be indifferent when it comes to you. Good, she murmured against his lips. Because these flowers are going straight to the trash, and my plans for tonight include only a very handsome man I know. The smile that lit up Martin's face was worth all the discomfort of the morning. I like the sound of that, he said, kissing her again. But first, I think I need to have a very clear conversation with Mr. Ruiz about professional boundaries." Julia laughed, feeling that familiar warmth that only Martin could elicit from her. "You're impossible." "I'm yours," he corrected, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." A month after the incident with Alejandro, Julia and Martin's relationship had found its natural rhythm. The office had grown accustomed to seeing them together. Projects were going better than ever, and for the first time in years, Julia felt completely happy in every aspect of her life. It was a Saturday night when Martin surprised her. "Ready?" he asked, appearing at an apartment door in a perfectly fitting dark suit and a mysterious smile. "Ready for what?" Julia asked, looking at her own clothes. "You said we were going out to dinner." "No, that we were going to a formal event." She was wearing an emerald green dress that Martin had bought her the week before, insisting that the color brought out her eyes. It was beautiful, but he felt too fancy for a casual dinner. "Trust me," he said, offering her his arm. "Tonight is special." During the car ride, Martin kept the conversation light, but Julia noticed his hands tense on the steering wheel and the way he checked his reflection in the rearview mirror more often than usual. "Are you nervous?" he finally asked. "Me?" He laughed, but the sound came out a little forced. "Why would I be nervous?" "I don't know. Just tell me." Martin glanced at her from the corner of his eye, smiling in that way that always made her melt. "Maybe a little," he admitted, but it was good nervousness. When they reached their destination, Julia was speechless. It wasn't the restaurant, but the rooftop of Barcelona's most exclusive hotel, transformed into a private garden, with golden lights hanging like stars between the plants, rose petals scattered on the floor, and a table for two, perfectly positioned to take in the panoramic view of the illuminated city. Martin whispered, "What's all this?" "Our special place," he replied, guiding her toward a table, away from the office, away from meetings, away from anything that could interrupt us. A waiter appeared as if by magic, pouring champagne and discreetly disappearing. Julia sat still, trying to process the incredible view and the intimate atmosphere Martin had created. "Are we celebrating something?" she asked. "Several things," he replied, raising his glass. "The success of your project, which has officially increased the company's productivity by 32%, the fact that tomorrow marks exactly 2 months since our first kiss, and—" He paused, as if gathering his courage to continue. "And the fact that you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." Julia's heart raced at the seriousness in his voice. "Martine, Julia, before I met you, my life was work, meetings, acquisitions, strategies, numbers. I woke up thinking about activity and went to bed planning the next day. It was successful, yes, but empty." He stood up and began pacing the table, clearly nervous. "Then you showed up, arguing with me over coffee, challenging me in meetings, making me laugh when I least expected it. Suddenly, I had a reason to smile, to look forward to Monday morning, to stay up late, not planning corporate strategies, but imagining ways to make you happy." He stopped in front of her, his gray eyes shining with an intensity that took her breath away. "You taught me that life isn't just about conquering markets, it's about conquering hearts. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the only real way to connect with someone. You taught me to trust again, to love again." Julia felt her tears threatening to spill over, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. "You made me better than I was, Julia, not just as a man, but as a person. And now I can't imagine my life without you in it." That's when he knelt down. The world stopped. The sound of Barcelona's traffic faded. The city lights blurred, and all that existed was Martin kneeling in front of her, with a small black velvet box in his hands, issued. "Julia Ramos," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, "would you do me the honor of being my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a stunning solitaire ring with a diamond that caught and reflected all the lights of the rooftop as if it were its own star. Julia couldn't speak. The tears she had been holding back, they finally rolled down her cheeks as she looked at the man she loved kneeling before her, offering her not just a ring, but his heart, his future, his entire life. "Me," she began, her voice cracked with emotion. "Martin, yes, of course I will." The smile that lit his face was brighter than all the lights in Barcelona put together. With trembling hands, he removed the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger, where it settled as if it had been meant to be there forever. Then he stood and gathered into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that was unlike any they had ever had before. It was a kiss of promise, of commitment, of two people who had found their home in each other whom. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you so much that sometimes my chest hurts just thinking about you." "And I love you," she replied, caressing his cheek, more than she ever thought it was possible to love someone. They stood there, holding each other like that under the stars, the city of Barcelona spreading out at their feet as a witness to their promise. In the distance, the bells of the Sagrada Familia began to chime, marking the hour with a melody that sounded like celestial music. "You know what the craziest thing about all this is?" Julia asked, looking at the ring on her finger, that shone like its own constellation. "What?" "It all started because you cut in line for our fee." Martin laughed, that genuine warm laugh that she had grown to love more than any other sound in the world. "Technically, I didn't cut in line. I got there first. Are we going to have our first fight as fiancés over who got to a coffee shop first?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Probably," he replied, kissing her again. "Then it's going to be perfect, like everything we do together." As the lights of Barcelona twinkled beneath them and the futures stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities, Julia knew she had found more than love. She had found her soulmate, her partner in coffee crime, her partner in life. And it had all started with an argument and a cup of coffee. Perfect. Dinner on the rooftop had been magical, but when Martin suggested they go to his apartment, Julia felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation that made her shiver. It wasn't as if they had never been alone before, but tonight was different. Tonight she was wearing his ring. Tonight they had made a promise that would change everything forever. Martin's apartment in the chic Chample neighborhood was exactly what she would have expected: modern, sophisticated, with large windows, offering stunning views of the city, but there were also personal touches she hadn't noticed on her previous visits in Tesoro Geek Auto Decorwit. A soft blanket folded over the couch, books of Spanish poetry on the coffee table, and framed photos of his parents in Italy. "Do you want something to drink?" he asked, loosening his tie as he headed toward the kitchen. "Some water would be nice," she replied, suddenly aware of how her voice sounded softer, more intimate, in the quiet space of her home, Moe. She stood by the windows, staring out at the lights of Barcelona, unconsciously fingering the ring on her finger. It was real. This was all real. In a few short hours she had gone from being simply Martin's girlfriend to his fiancé, and the magnitude of that change overwhelmed her in the most beautiful way possible, "What are you thinking about?" he asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of water. She admitted everything. How things had changed so quickly. How 6 months ago I hadn't even known you existed. And now I can imagine a future without you." He finished, setting the glasses down on the side table and moving closer until he was directly behind her. His hands found her waist, and Julia relaxed against his chest, feeling the solidity and warmth of his body. She could feel his breath in her hair, the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Julia," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. "Are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want?" She turned in his arms, staring into his gray eyes that shone with a mix of desire and vulnerability. "More certain than I'd ever been of anything in my life," she answered, bringing her hands to his face. "I love you, Martin. Not just the version of you that's my boss, or the version that buys me coffee in the morning. I love you. All of you, with all your fears, your strengths, your past, your future, everything." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if memorizing her words. "For so long I've been afraid of this," he confessed, "of feeling so much for someone who could destroy me if he left me." "I won't leave you," she promised. "I'll never know." His eyes opened, and the intensity in them took her breath away. "But still, sometimes I can't believe you're real, that this is real." Instead of answering with words, Julia leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss unlike any they had shared before, slower, deeper, and loaded with the silent promise of everything that was yet to come. Her hands tangled in his hair, and he pulled her closer as if he wanted to merge with her. When they broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. "Julia," he murmured, his hands caressing her back. "I don't want to rush you." "We can wait until—" "I don't want to wait," she interrupted softly. "I've waited my whole life for this, for someone like you. I don't want to wait any longer." His eyes darkened, but they also softened with something that seemed like adoration. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers together, and slowly led her to her room. The space was elegant yet cozy, dominated by a large bed with white sheets and a window that framed the illuminated city like a painting. Martin paused by the bed, turning to look at her with an expression that mixed desire, love, and something that seemed almost irreverence. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his hands finding the zipper of her dress. "But not just on the outside. You're beautiful in the way you think, in the way you laugh, and in the way you make everything in my life make sense." His words touched her deeply, and she felt the tears threatening to well up again. "Martin, I want you to know something," he continued, his hands moving slowly, reverently. "For me, this isn't just physical. This is giving you my entire soul." The dress slid smoothly to the floor, and Julia stood before him feeling a vulnerability that was both terrifying and liberating. But when she saw how Martin looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, all insecurity melted away. "For me, too," she whispered, beginning to unbutton his shirt. This is it. This is trusting you with everything I am." Their movements were slow, careful, as if they were performing a dance that only they knew. Every caress was a promise, every kiss a declaration, every whisper a prayer of gratitude for having found each other. When they finally met in bed, there was no rush, no desperate urgency. There was only pure, simple love, manifesting in every touch, in every glance, in every shared breath. In every shared breath. "I love you," Martin murmured against her skin, his lips trailing kisses from her neck to her shoulder. "I love you so much it aches in the most beautiful way possible." "I love you," she replied, her hands exploring the solidity of his back, memorizing every line, every curve. "You are everything I never knew I needed." Their bodies met with an ease that surprised them both, as if they had been created specifically for this moment, for this perfect connection. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty. There was only love, manifesting in its purest, most beautiful form. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the soft sheets, Julia rested her head on Martin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, which had become her favorite sound in the world. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns across her bare back. "That this is perfect," she murmured. "That I've never felt so complete, so at home." "I was thinking the same thing," he said, kissing the crown of her head. "And I was also thinking that you are officially the first woman to have slept in this bed." Julia lifted her head to look at him in surprise. "Seriously? Seriously? I've never brought anyone here. This was my private space, my refuge. But now I want it to be our home." The emotion those words stirred in her was so intense that it left her speechless for a moment. "Our home?" he finally repeated. "If you want. Or we can find a new place, something that will be completely ours from the start." Julia snuggled closer to him, feeling a happiness so complete that it almost overwhelmed her. "I like the idea of making this place our home," she murmured. "But with a few conditions, once." "What?" "I need a space for my home office, and I want to change those stained curtains for something more cheerful. And we definitely need a better coffee machine." Martin's laugh vibrated through his chest. "Deal. Although I should warn you that my current coffee machine cost more than your first car." "Of course it does," she laughed. "But I bet it doesn't make coffee with as much love as I do every morning, does it?" He murmured, hugging her tighter. "Definitely not." As Barcelona slept outside their window and the first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon, Julia and Martin lay awake talking in hushed tones about dreams and plans, about the future they wouldn't build together. And for the first time in their lives, they both knew with absolute certainty that they had found their home, not in a place but in each other's arms. 6 months later, on the morning of their wedding, Julia woke up in her apartment with Carmen fluttering around her like a slightly hysterical fairy godmother. "I can't believe you're getting married today," she exclaimed for the 5th time in 10 minutes to Martin del Valle, your boss, the man you argued with over coffee. "Carmen, take a breath." Julia laughed from her position on the bed where she was eating her last breakfast as a single woman. "If you keep this up, you're going to have a heart attack before the ceremony. It's just so romantic." Carmen sighed, hanging the wedding dress in the closet with the care of someone handling heirloom, a love story that began with a fight and ended with a happy ending. "It doesn't end today," Julia corrected her gently. "Today is where it really begins." The dress she had chosen was perfect, elegant, but not ostentatious, with delicate ivory lace that complemented her skin. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the world, but it was hers, chosen with love and care. Martin had insisted that he could buy her anything, but she had preferred something that felt authentically hers. 2 hours later, as Carmen and Sofia, who had become a genuine friend after the incident with Alejandro, were helping her with the finishing touches, her phone rang. "It's Martin," Carmen announced, looking at the screen. "I'll answer." "No," Julia and Sofia shouted in unison. "It's bad luck to see the groom before the ceremony," Sofia explained, taking the phone from Carmen. "But I can't answer for you." "Hello, my friend's future husband," Sofia said jokingly. "No, you can't talk to her." "Yes, she's beautiful." "No, I'm not going to tell you what she looks like." "You'll have to wait like all normal grooms." Julia laughed, imagining Martin's frustration on the other end of the line. "He says he loves you and can't wait to see you," Sofia reported after hanging up. "And also, something about how if it weren't for him promising to be a gentleman, he'd be here, right now, breaking down doors." "Typical of him," Julia murmured, feeling butterflies in her stomach that had more to do with excitement than nerves. The ceremony would take place at a private villa on the outskirts of Barcelona, an intimate and beautiful location that they had chosen together. They didn't want anything grand or ostentatious, just their closest loved ones in a space where they could pledge their eternal love without distractions. When it was time to leave, Julia took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was radiant not because of the professional makeup or the fancy dress, but because of the pure happiness that radiated from within. "Ready," she announced, reaching for her bouquet of white peonies and soft pinks. The drive to the villa was a blur of excited nerves and laughter. Carmen couldn't stop taking photos. Sophia obsessively reviewed the day's schedule, and Julia simply smiled, feeling as if she were floating. Were floating. When she arrived, she could see the guests already gathered in the garden. Martin's parents, who had flown in from Italy and had welcomed her with a warmth that had moved her to tears. Her own parents, who had finally understood that their daughter had found something special. A few colleagues from the office who had become genuine friends, Wunakans, and in the front row, waiting for her with a smile she could see even from a distance, was Martin. He was wearing an impeccable tuxedo, but what took her breath away wasn't how elegant he looked, but the look of absolute love and adoration on his face when their eyes met. The music started. They had chosen an instrumental version of Life is Beautiful, and Julia began her walk down the aisle toward her future, toward the man who had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined possible. With each step, memories flooded through her mind. Their first argument in the coffee shop, the shock of discovering that he was her new boss, their first tense conversations, the moment she realized she was falling in love, their first kiss in the storm, all the small intimacies that had built their relationship. When they finally reached the altar, Martin extended his hand toward hers, and as she took it, Julia felt that familiar electric current that always passed between them. "You are absolutely beautiful," he murmured, quietly enough that only she could hear. "You don't look bad either," she replied, trying to maintain her composure, but feeling as if she might burst with happiness. The officiant, a family friend of Martin's, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the importance of finding your soulmate. But Julia barely heard the formal words. She was lost in Martin's gray eyes, in the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When it came time for the personal vows, Martin went first. Julia began, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Less than a year ago, I thought I knew what success was. I had a thriving business, professional recognition, financial security. I thought that was enough." She paused, smiling. "Then you came along, arguing with me over coffee, and you showed me that I knew nothing about what really mattered in life. You taught me that true success is not measured in acquisitions or profits, but in shared moments, in genuine laughter, in having someone who loves you exactly as you are." Tears began to roll down Julia's cheeks. "Julia, you taught me to be vulnerable, to trust, to love, without reservation. You turned my black and white world into technicolor. And now, I can't imagine a single day without your laughter, without your challenges, without your hugs that make me feel like I've come home." Her voice cracked slightly. "I promise to love you on the good days and the hard days. I promise to support your dreams, as you've supported mine. I promise to never take for granted the incredible gift that is your love. And I promise that no matter how many years pass, I will always remember how lucky I am that you decided to argue with an arrogant stranger in a coffee shop." The guests laughed through their own tears, and Julia had to take a moment to regain her composure before answering. Martin began, his voice shaky but steady. "For years, I thought I knew what I wanted out of life. A stable career, independence, maybe eventually a comfortable and predictable relationship. I had my plans, my goals, my future perfectly mapped out." He smiled through his tears. "And then You showed up, completely impossible in the world, in a coffee line, and you shattered all my plans in the most beautiful way possible. You showed me that real love isn't comfortable or predictable. It's challenging. It's exciting. It's transformative. Her voice grew louder. You taught me that it's okay to be vulnerable, that it's okay to depend on someone, that it's okay to dream big. You made me better than I was, not by changing me, but by helping me become the best version of myself. She looked straight into his eyes. I promise to love you with all that I am and all that I will ever be. I promise to challenge you when you need to be challenged and comfort you when you need comforting. I promise to be your partner in all the adventures that lie ahead, and I promise that no matter how successful you become or how many endeavors you conquer, you will always be simply my Martin, the man who taught me that true love is the greatest achievement of all. When they exchanged rings, when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, when they finally kissed as spouses for the first time, Julia felt as if the universe had sighed in awe, contentment, as if everything had found its rightful place. The kiss was soft, sweet, full of promise for the future, but it was also familiar, like coming home after a long journey. The reception was exactly what they had dreamed of. Intimate, joyful, full of love and laughter. They danced their first song as a married couple under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved the most, and Julia knew she wouldn't change a single moment of their love story. Later that night, alone in their bridal suite, Martin and Julia sat on the balcony with glasses of champagne, watching the lights of Barcelona in the distance. Any regrets? The joker asked, playing with her wedding ring. Just one, she replied with a serious expression. Which one? That I didn't argue with you over coffee earlier. Martine's laughter filled the night, and when he kissed her, Julia knew they had found their forever. It hadn't been the path she had planned, but it had been perfect. Because sometimes the best love stories begin with an argument, continue with challenges and obstacles, and end with two people finding each other exactly when they needed each other the most. And as Barcelona slept at their feet, and the future stretched out before them full of endless possibilities, Mrs. Julia Del Valle snuggled into her husband's arms and knew they had found something worth a lifetime of shared mornings and cups of coffee. Leave your comment and share this story with someone who needs inspiration. And if you want to continue listening to real and exciting stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Together we can rewrite our own stories.